Today's guest is my friend, my mentor, and a woman who truly exemplifies what sponsorship looks like from one woman to another. Nora Burns is an expert in human resources. She earned her expert title when she combined her decades of experience in HR with her undercover research. Nora is also a speaker who captivates audiences across the nation with her stories, her experience, and her sense of humor. And now, after months of deliberation, she is now the host of her own podcast, Stories from the Breakroom. I asked Nora to join me today so that we can leverage her HR experience to help us dive into ways that we can equalize the interview and hiring process for women in construction and other male-dominated fields. Let's get started. Okay, my friend. So you have been on over 250 interviews. And if somebody had told me that about you, I would immediately think she must really suck at interviews, right? Like how many jobs does someone have to apply for to be 250? But the key to this is these are all interviews that you went on as someone other than yourself. This is the undercover candidate that is your trademark, that you go and you help companies by going undercover to help them, right? Like, okay, so I just want to get this out there. Make sure that I fully understand as well. So companies hire you, someone within a company hires you to do this.
Now
Is that always how it happens?
No, it's not how it started.
Okay, tell me more.
What happens now. So how it started was when I was with one of my clients, as a consulting client, helping them to reimagine and redevelop their hiring process. And in the middle of it, as many times as I've done there was something about this particular day at this particular hour where all of a sudden I was just like zapped with the fact that I hadn't been on a job interview in over a decade. So I'm sitting here thinking, as somebody who is my entire life, I've been appreciative of a shifting of perspective, at looking at things through different eyes, at making sure we seek out the insights from lots of different people. And here I was redesigning a hiring process, and I hadn't been on the other side of that decision table in over a decade. And I thought, well, that's just kind of hypocritical. So let's go out and do that. And I thought, I'll go on like 6 interviews, half dozen interviews in a neighboring town, one that's not where I live, so I'd be less likely to be recognized, but one that's close enough that I could drive to for an interview. And I'll just go on 6 interviews just to make me better at what I do as a consultant in this area. And I was, oh my gosh, they were so bad. They were so bad. And after 6 interviews, I thought, what the hell is happening? What is going on in hiring? There were lazy interviews. I was in part of a team interview, and I don't mean a panel interview. I don't mean where there's multiple people from the organization present interviewing a candidate. I mean where there were multiple candidates with one interviewer.
In the same room?
In the same room.
They interviewed at the same time?
It was the Hunger Games of interviews. It was, and we were interviewing for a receptionist position, right? So I went on 6. I was a little horrified. I talked to my business coach, and I was lamenting this fact. And I said, I just don't know. Maybe it's just this one town. Like maybe somebody came to the chamber and did really bad training. So we decided I needed a better data set. And I love me a spreadsheet so much. And so I set out we decided I needed at least 100 interviews. So I'd have a better sample size. Then it needs to be across the country and not all here in Colorado, because I don't want somebody to say, oh, that's so sweet that you do that in Colorado. We're so much better here in Connecticut, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted a variation in geographic area and in the types of positions.
What I really wanted to talk about today was equalization of hiring practices in the construction industry, in male-dominated industries as whole. I know you've worked for some construction companies, but we can make it more broad. But just talking about things, 2 different tunnels I want to focus on today. One being the tunnel of, I don't know why I just decided to call it a tunnel. One being the tunnel of what can women do to be more prepared or to better respond in interviews at companies that are heavily male populated or male dominated, whichever listeners prefer. And the other being, what can those male dominated companies do better to attract and actually hire the women that go through the interview?
If you are
I
a
do.
woman interviewing in a male dominated or male populated space, PS, I could do a whole half hour on the differentiation between those two terms. But if you are in a male populated or male dominated industry, a couple of things that I would recommend as the undercover candidate that you can do to try to make it more likely that you get the interview. If you have, and one of them is going to sound a little sleazy, this first
To
one.
get the interview or to get the job, to get the offer?
First to get the interview.
Okay.
Because you can't get the job without the interview.
Okay.
And what I found, so I've done a couple of speaking engagements in the construction industry. And generally before I do the keynote, I'll do some comparison. So I have recent data. So most recently it's been from the roofing industry, where I would send in applications under a traditionally male gendered name and a traditionally female gendered name, and with similar backgrounds and experience, and track where am I getting traction and where am I not. So if you have a middle name, if you have a first name that is gender neutral, great. If you don't and you have a middle name that's gender neutral, I'm going to have you do N middle name, use your middle name, whatever. Get past the first hump. Anything you can do to get past that first hump. So I want you to do a little editing. I don't want you to falsify your name, but I do. If you have if your middle name's Shannon, or your middle name's Jay, or your middle name is, give me another.
We get it.
Gender neutral name, right?
We got it.
I want you to use it. The other thing is I want you to go into LinkedIn ahead of time in the organization and look for women who work at that organization. So if you're coming in, I want you to already be connected to other women that work there and reach out to them and say, hey, I'm talking about this organization. Do you enjoy working there? Right? Get a little bit of intel from them on what their perspective is. It also may help track you back to that candidate, to that interview. To code switch going into a male dominated industry, right? Like you need to be ready.
I don't know what code switch means.
Oh, code switching is when you use language differently in one situation than in another. So
Okay.
for example, I'm a poker player. How I speak to other people sitting at a poker table is nothing like how I would speak when I'm talking with you or with my clients, right? It's just a different language that I use. Poker is mainly male dominated. I want to have a very specific feel and look when I'm there. I tend to change my language subtly. We hear about code switching happening a lot, both between genders as well as between races, in order to try to fit in differently. Again, that's a whole, you could have somebody that just talks to you about code switching through it. But I want you to be aware when you're going into the interview that you're code switching into a male dominated industry. You're going to talk more about the technicalities of the work, more about the tools and the instruments of the work than you might normally. The language that you use in that interview has to speak to the people who are in that room at that time. And if it's highly male dominated, male populated, they're almost all going to be men. I also want you to pay very close attention to if there is a woman in the room who's part of the interview panel, what questions has that person been designated to ask? It's going to give you some insight into the culture of that organization, right? Just like on the other side, I tell hiring people who are doing the hiring managers, to have a woman ask a highly technical question and pay attention to who the candidate responds to for the answer. Because we'll see little subtle things about unconscious bias that show up when I show up and ask a highly technical, highly industry specific question. And then they turn to a man in the room to answer the question. Now, I also circle back on it and I say, tell me why did you talk to Bob? Because sometimes there's a legitimate reason. They'll say, oh, my understanding is that Bob oversees that aspect of the business. And that's why I talked to him, right? And other times they just go, huh, weird. Like they've been caught off guard. So I think going in as a woman going into some of the more male dominated industries, it's being even, and it's sad that we still have to do it, but it is making sure that we're speaking the language at a higher tier and a higher expectation than than most of our male counterparts will do. It's kind of like when you talked about saying that you need to make it very clear that you want to be on the superintendent track and you don't want to be on the project management track. It's like saying very clear, I want tools in my hands during the day. I want to go home. I want to go home dirty, darn it. Right. Like I want to be in the thick of it, not away from the dirty part of the business. Right.
Yeah. Being clear about your expectations and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
A few things that I would add, being on the other side of the table when I've interviewed women, things that I really appreciate that I think also help offset some of the biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious. Women, be on time or be early. There is a bias that women tend to be late. That may or may not be true for you, but it is a bias about the gender. And if you show up late for the appointment, for the interview, it just makes it true.
Layers it. Yeah.
The second thing I think is really important is a firm handshake. I'm going to be curious what you think if you disagree on this with me, but it just in this industry, if I feel like that's really important. I want to feel that this is what they want, that they're confident in who they are, because in construction, I think that you are more successful, the more confident you are, the more successful you are. Now, with that said, I did not start out as a confident person. So that may have been what made me go through 8 interviews and they finally saw it and gave me the chance. But I'm not saying yes or no from a handshake, but it just moves it to the next tier so I can be checking for something else. The third thing and last thing I would say is eye contact, is making sure that you're giving that appropriate eye contact when people are talking. I had an interview last week that I did, and it was a virtual interview, unfortunately, which is unfortunate in general, but that's how it had to be done. And even virtually, the person was not able to look at us in the eye, like from the video. You could tell they just kept looking at the ceiling when we'd ask questions. And that just immediately makes me question many things.
Oh my gosh, we're going to have so much fun. Okay. So 2 things, the last 2 things, handshake and where you're looking on a video interview are loaded with bias, absolutely loaded with bias. So let's go in reverse order. So teaching people to get ready for a video interview is a whole nother layer of things. So I actually have clients that we send out a video interview readiness kit. Hey, now I'm like, do I have one down here? I might have one down here. We send them a readiness kit that has some very basic things in it. The little clip-on light that you can put, because most people don't have, the lights that I have and the lights that you have in their lives. So they have that. We send them googly eyes to put the googly eyes right here next to that camera and say, this is where we want looking. As much as you're going to want to go down here and you look at us, this looks very different. And I need you looking at the camera because we have such strong bias in American culture about eye contact and what it means. And even if we're looking at a screen here, people will register it as they're not making eye contact, even though I'm looking at your image. That's a huge differentiation if they're on a laptop. So we will send them kits and say, we want you to be successful on this. We give them guidelines on how to interview via video. And the reality is they may have been going like this because they had dogs upstairs that kept running and they kept thinking, for the love of God, stop running. Right? Now they may, because the same rules don't apply as if I'm in person in an interview room. If I'm in an interview room and I'm looking up, right? There's all this body language around, am I making something up or am I not making something up? Do I need to look away from people because I'm an introvert and I can't think when I'm looking straight at somebody's eyes, kind of a thing. So being cognizant of that, and we also train hiring managers on some of the biases that are built into video interviews, including all the things that are in the background normally, because most people don't have a video studio that they're using in order to do their interviews. So we send a little tension bar that can fit between any doorway or hallway and a basic black drape. Actually, we changed to gray drapes because we realized we're interviewing people with black skin that they were fading into it. So we changed to a gray drape. And that was my own bias, right? It shows up in all kinds of different ways. Sure. So that's some of the video interviewing things. I think it's very difficult to get to know somebody really well on video unless you really dig in differently to an interview. It's a very different experience. The other is the handshake. When I'm speaking with hiring managers, I'll say, please, we've been teaching people on interviewing skills how to shake hands since the 1970s. So, but the reality is, unless you're an outside salesperson, your handshake is really not important to your job, right? If I'm working in the office and I'm filling out the purchasing forms, or an estimator, or I'm working on a concrete pour, the only time my handshake is important is in the interview. And so as a result, it creates a very strong bias for people who do have really good handshakes and not a limp handshake. So all of that to say, on the other side, I say, please don't use the handshake. And if anything, don't even shake hands with anybody, right? Somebody tried to make us believe that during COVID that the handshake would go away. I knew that was not going to be the case. It's too central to American culture. But you can say, go ahead and take a seat, right? And not shake hands with anybody to avoid the bias. And it feels awkward because in American culture we do that. So all of that to say, yes, and if you are on the interview side of it, practice your handshake, because there are still people who are going to make decisions based on it, even though I don't want them to. And nothing, when it is such a strong bias and you go in with a wimpy handshake, it does not serve anybody. And there is a strong gender bias to a handshake, right? My hand's simply not as big as the hands of other people. So,
well, and that's my whole point with everything. The three that I gave is there are biases. Some of them are conscious, some of them are unconscious, but to help accelerate women to the interview, through the onboarding, all of it, whatever we can do to set ourselves up to jump the bias is what helps us get ahead until the world catches up with, this isn't important. This isn't really important.
Yeah.
But it's still very prevalent in our industry. And so my suggestion is still, like, do it to jump it. Right.
I like the jump the bias analogy kind of a thing. I like that image in my head of jumping the bias. Just today, I was talking with two friends at brunch. All of a sudden, I need a little sip of water. Just today, I was talking with two girlfriends in this industry, and two of us realized we both grew up Polled Hereford farmers, and with horses, and from this very rural environment. And the other one was like, I could not be more separated from that environment. Like, I wouldn't even know what to do. I don't understand that Polled Hereford is a breed, right? So growing up in ag, it's a whole different thing. But I said, there's something about when I put my work boots on. I said, I never worn traditional cowboy boots. They don't fit my feet particularly well. So I wear a steel-toed work boot when I work out on a farm or on a ranch. And I said, but I walk differently. I walk different with the boots on. And realizing that, I also want to remind you of how you dress for this is going to be how you show up, right? So when I am wearing the gear, I am fully immersed in the mode. And it changes how I sit. It changes how I stand. It changes how I walk. It changes my confidence. I'm telling you, if you grew up, it's kind of like if you grew up in construction, if you grew up in ag, if you grew up in some of those industries that are more male populated and more male dominated, there's just a putting on my boots kind of thing that happens. And being cognizant of that and how you walk into a space is going to be important. How you feel and what you show up in.
Okay, so I'm now wanting to go. I want to go a little deeper into this site. So I want to ask you, do you have a little more time today than what we originally had planned?
We're good.
Okay, because what I'm now thinking is that we're going to keep talking about this for a minute and finish out this topic, and then there will be a part 2 that goes into the actual person interviewing. So let's stick on the interviewers for a minute, women. Let's talk about the way you dress for an interview in a male-dominated company. And granted, these are, once again, anyone listening, these are generalities. This doesn't mean for you in every situation. It may be different for you. Like for me, what I have learned and has been the most successful for me, whether it's an interview or the first client meeting or a networking event, or even being on stage, I wear what I'm most comfortable in that is most appropriate for the event or for the interview or for whatever it
Mhm.
is. And like I look at these speakers, right? Like these amazing women speakers on stage, and they look great in their pencil skirts and their beautiful heels, and I'm like, I know I will not do as good a job if that's what I'm wearing, because I'll be uncomfortable about the way I'm walking or how the shoes fit or, whatever else, from a comfort standpoint. But then there's also as a woman in construction, I have always thought more about what I'm wearing every day than I guarantee any man on a job site has ever thought about, especially as I moved into leadership. I'm like, okay, in the morning, I may have to go first to a job site, and then I may have a client meeting in the afternoon. And for any man, he shows up in his shoes and his pants and his button down shirt, and it works for the whole damn day. And I, I I tried that, and for me, it felt a little manly. So think about it every day when I get dressed. Where am I going to be and how am I going to resonate with my audience, whether it's an interviewer, an interviewee, a live audience, whatever it is. So what are your recommendations in general for women going into interviews where they're probably the only woman at the table, or maybe there's another?
I love your point on the fact that you have to be you in the moment, right? You have to feel really truly who you are.
Mhm.
And that is the most important thing, that you have to feel, it has to, you feel solid, you feel smart, right?
Mhm.
You feel comfortable. The reality is, be it on a stage or at an interview table, if I am tucking, if I'm like, oh gosh, is this whatever? It doesn't look good, and it's distracted me from my being able to fully participate in the conversation. If
Absolutely.
if I if I look in the mirror and I think, is this is this going to be too tight? Is this going to be comfortable? The answer is it is. Go change, right? So, and not because, oh, I'm gonna wear something that's too tight and men are gonna get distracted, not in that kind of version of things. But if I am cognizant that it doesn't feel good, then
Mhm.
I'm not going to show up as my best self.
Yeah.
So how do you show up that you're your best self? So you're not feeling like something's too tight, too loose, too short, too any of those types of things. um and I do subscribe. I am not by You have a much better sense of fashion than I ever will. It has never been a priority, an item of focus for me. I literally own 5 of the same dress. if, if I am on your stage, there's a really good shot I'm wearing the black dress with the white edging on it.
Um,
I'm comfortable in it. It looks great on a stage. And I don't have to think twice about what to pull from the closet, right? There's 5 of the exact same dress. And so it's never been a priority of mine. I'm never going to show up as the most fashionable interviewee kind of a thing, or interviewer. But the reality is, am I comfortable? Am I able to focus on the questions at hand? Am I able to be present? And that is, quite frankly, the most important thing.
yeah.
Uh,
100% agree. It's not about wearing the right color. It's not about whether you wear pants or you wear a skirt. It's about not wear, okay, this really looked good on this model in the store, so this is what I think I want to look like this when they see me.
yeah.
They're really gonna look less at your clothes. The clothes start to fade away as the conversation goes, and you draw
Yeah.
them into your conversation and what you're capable of, and what your experience is, or if you have no experience, what your ambition is and your self-motivation and stuff. The clothes start to fade away,
Yeah.
unless you're fidgeting with them, unless you're uncomfortable. So just I love that we both have the same, wear what makes you feel powerful, what makes
Yeah.
you feel good in your own skin. Let's talk about um let's say a recruiter has reached out and said, hey Nora, we're really interested in you doing an interview at this company. What things would you recommend for someone, let's stay focused on women, to look at, to do? I know you already said reaching out to the linked people on LinkedIn, but are there other
Yeah.
things that you recommend, making sure you're really prepared for the interview?
Yeah, well, even before I decide if I'm going to take the interview, I'm going to do some research on the organization. I think we forget as job candidates that we are also a decider. Just
That's right.
because we're offered the interview doesn't mean we have to take it. And so before I'm going to go even consider this organization, I'm going to look at the board of directors. I'm going to see what it represents, who it represents. There's a whole difference in about working for a family-owned business versus a privately owned business versus publicly owned business, right? So what are those layers look like? But I want to see the face of the organization on their website. I'm going to look at the images of the board of directors. I'm going to see if they represent their team on the page. I'm going to go look at Glassdoor. For sure, Glassdoor is a review site for employees to give feedback on interviews as well as on their job experience. I'm going to see if it's a organization that would have Yelp reviews based on their locations. I'm going to look at the Yelp reviews. However, organizations treat their customers, there is an absolute correlation to how they treat their employees. So when customers are complaining about communication issues within that organization, so too will employees be complaining about communication issues. So getting that kind of an intel about an organization, I'm going to check Indeed and what the reviews and those types of things say there. Because for me, there's some values elements and there's some how do we support our community elements that are important to me. So whatever that is for you as the job candidate, to kind of take a look at where do they position based on where you want to go. I also want to ask that recruiter, if it's a headhunter or an internal recruiter, I always ask, why is the job open? Why is it that we're even talking? And people say, oh, well, they decided to take another offer. They decided to take another opportunity that would expand them. That's great. How long were they in the role? Because if that might be a legitimate answer, but then they've only been in that role for 3 months. So what happened to the last person? Right. I want to know if I'm one of a revolving door. I want to understand why the role is even open in the first place. Those are some of the first things I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Also, I did the same thing when I lived in apartments. I wanted to know why the apartment was open. Somebody die
Well,
here.
yeah.
I want
So
to know those types of things, and I want to reach out to anybody I know who might be connected to that organization in advance.
So I do some similar things, and I think what I'm about to tell you is a good transition between what I recommend for women to do and prepare for, but also what companies need to be thinking about. Because when I first think about going to a company, I go look at their website and I look at, like you said, their board of directors, their leadership team. Is it all old white guys? Is it all men? If there is a woman, then I go and I really dig into her on LinkedIn to see like what is her real role? What is she doing? Like, and then I start looking at the different people on LinkedIn. One of the things I look for on LinkedIn is those people that are at the top of the organization, are they active on LinkedIn? Because I have come to find out, um, to me, it seems that if they don't really have an active profile, then they're probably not that open to their employees. They're not that available to their employees. They're not that, or they just don't have really good marketing and stuff, which could also be a function of it's a smaller company. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a caveat. But if it's a big enough company that they have a good social media presence, but the leader is not really, doesn't even have a real picture, doesn't have a picture. I'm like, okay, he's not people person. He's not, that's how
Mm-hmm.
I feel. Um, and then I check out their social media because I want to see what are they promoting. I want to see, are they promoting their people? Like, are they excited about individuals or are they excited about their projects? What kind of projects do they build? Or are they just not on there at all? It just helps me understand their culture a little more because culture is very important for me. It may not be for everyone, but I want to
Yeah.
be in a culture, a particular culture. But if you've done that research ahead of time and you sit in an interview and they tell you something completely different, um,
Yeah.
that's kind of fun for me as an interviewer. Because I've been like, okay, I hear you saying that, but I looked online and this is what I saw. And then it's like,
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorites as an interviewee is we are a strongly team-based organization. When they say, oh, we're just very team-based, but I'm sitting in a room with one other person and thinking, you're not. And this is my third interview and I've met one person each time. That's not a team-based organization. And it makes me a little like, impulse control to not be like, okay, what you don't know about me is I'm the undercover candidate. And yeah. But I do think that now I am fascinated by this perception of if the leader of the organization doesn't have a LinkedIn profile that's active, does that mean that they are not open to employee feedback? I've never considered it, quite frankly. This now
I may be wrong.
I don't know. Now I need data.
Listeners, it's easy for listeners to look up. Go look up your boss on LinkedIn and your boss or your boss's boss or whoever and see like, oh, this does correlate. Or if it doesn't, then email me and tell me
I'd love that.
Whatever.
I'd love that from the perspective of the listeners who know from their experience that this person is or is not open to employee feedback, right? Because I'm thinking of a former CEO that I worked with years ago. We actually had a problem with him taking calls from employees because I'm like, you can't take every call from every employee. We have thousands upon thousands of employees. But his phone line was always open. So if you had talked to 2 layers and you weren't getting resolution, you could call John. And now I'm wondering, like, would he have had a LinkedIn profile? Because he definitely was a person who was interested in feedback from employees. I don't know. We're going to pay attention. But if you can tell us about your boss and you're listening, man, I'd love that data. I'd love that data point because it's interesting. But I do think in an age of social media, who you show up as an employment brand across social media right now is an important indicator for people. And right or wrong, fair or unfair, it is in today's day and age, how you show up, who you're bragging about, what you're talking about. Do you only talk about women in the workplace, women in construction, right? Do you only talk about issues as that day of the calendar year comes by, or are we forever celebrating our employees? And I just think it's again, if workplace culture is important to you, and then even within workplace culture, there's delineations, which is the most important element for me. So I like that. I have a note. I have another research element to look into. There you go.
I can already sense that that's going to be something that we discuss in the future. If you know someone that could benefit from this particular episode, then share it with them. Or if you want to continue to learn about the untapped and underutilized resources that will take your business to the next level, then follow the podcast. You don't want to miss an episode where we discuss what you needed to hear. And lastly, there is a link in the show notes that will allow you to reach out to me directly if you want to accelerate that learning curve. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.